Well, good evening to the Americas, good afternoon to Tokyo, to Australia, good morning to Europe. Welcome to our April community call. It's good to see everybody again. And this month, our community spotlight will be on Peter Hoddie and his work on Node-RED MCU Edition. We'll hear from Peter on the background and progress of that project and how it is strengthening both the Moddable SDK and the ECMA 419 standard. But first, as usual, I'll run through highlights of the April Moddable SDK release. And then, as we always do, at the end of the call, we'll have some time for Q&A with the team and for kind of chat amongst the community here. So with that, I'm going to test my luck and start screen sharing on screen number 2 there. Excellent. And with any luck, you're seeing release notes right now, and if not, just shout. So on to our review of the April 2023 release notes. This is release 3.8.0 of the Moddable SDK, and it includes all improvements made from March 1st to April 1st of 2023. There's a lot in the release notes this month, so I'd encourage everybody to kind of go check it out. But there's 2 high-level areas that I want to highlight this month. First is that we have 2 interesting new projects that came in from Moddable intern Daniel Abdu. He's been hard at work building new drivers and examples to share with the community. And 2 of them are what I want to show you first here. So first up are 2 new examples that demonstrate how to work with Amazon's AWS IoT platform. There's an example that shows how to post data to AWS IoT via HTTP, and another one that shows how to do the same with MQTT. And then accompanying those examples is a tutorial here that shows you how to set up the required TLS certificates and keys needed to interact with AWS. It turns out in practice, because Moddable SDK has excellent support for every piece of the stack that AWS IoT relies upon, a lot of the trick is actually just kind of getting it up and running. And so this document here will guide you through that. And all of that is in the Moddable SDK examples network AWS directory. So I encourage everybody to check that out. Then second, we have support for a new sensor in the Moddable SDK from Daniel. That is a driver and an example for the DF robot SEN0322 oxygen sensor. And here is a quick video of that sensor in action. So what you see up here in kind of the top left of this video is the sensor itself. On the right, you have output from XS bug. That's just console output. And what you can see is when Daniel takes this candle with the sensor attached to it and tosses a airtight container over it, we go from about 21,000 parts per million of oxygen pretty quickly below that. And as the flame starts to burn down and self-extinguishes, we get down into the mid 19% oxygen by volume. And then when you remove the container, we get back up closer to 21% oxygen by volume, which is atmospheric levels. So just a little demo of that. We'd encourage everybody to go in and check that code out also, especially if you happen to be new to ECMA 419 sensor drivers or applications that use them. That's a very nice, concise example of how to do that. Next up, the second thing that I want to highlight in the release notes this month is that we have a great deal of updates to microcontroller ports and device targets this month. The biggest update is preview support for Espressif's ESP-IDF 5, which we'll talk about in a moment. But first, I want to talk about a couple other details that went in this month. One interesting one is that our ESP32 and Raspberry Pi Pico ports now have larger default virtual machine memory allocations. And that's interesting if you've been following our work for a while, because you'll know that a motivating goal of our work has always been to do as much as we can with as few resources as possible. And as a result, for years now, we've kept our default VM allocations based on the constraints of the ESP8266 port, which is our tightest device that's in common use. But as more and more developers kind of come into the community and start building more and more ambitious projects on top of the more generous platforms like the ESP32 and the Raspberry Pi Pico, they were running into trouble with running out of memory, and didn't realize that it's possible to just tweak the settings of the VM and the JavaScript stack sizes to meet their needs. And so we've gone ahead and provided more generous allocations there now on those two ports by default, just to help ease people into those platforms and realize that you can do a lot more with them than you might be able to do in the same footprint on the 8266. So that's just kind of a nice little optimization there. We now support 2 new Raspberry Pi Pico development boards, Adafruit's Trinky QT2040 and the Zhao RP2040 generic ILA 9341 display boards. Those are just handy development kits that you might use to get started with doing graphics on top of the Raspberry Pi Pico using the Moddable SDK. And then in a significant step forward for our Pico support, the Moddable SDK build has been updated to Pico SDK version 1.5. Mike Kellner, who's on the call, did a lot of that work, and now everybody can use kind of top of tree Pico support again, which is excellent. Which also leads me to the last big topic from the release notes that I wanted to cover, and that is that, as I mentioned earlier, the Moddable SDK now includes preview support for ESP-IDF 5 from Espressif. That's a very significant upgrade, which deprecates many of the I/O APIs that the Moddable SDK relies on. And there's still work to do on kind of finishing up that port, but everything that has been completed is working really well. And it's all working well enough that we wanted to start getting the community involved in that project. So scroll down here to the right section. There you go. We've posted a preview release so that community members can try out ESP-IDF 5 support, report issues, contribute improvements, everything that the community does when working with the Moddable SDK. And you can get to that just by going here to GitHub and checking out the IDF-V5 branch of the Moddable SDK. One important note here, as it says in the release notes here, is that this branch only supports IDF5. So if you're on an IDF4 release, you don't want to use this. IDF4 support has been removed here. This is just for testing out the new ESP-IDF 5 support. And I did want to kind of draw a line between the new support for Raspberry Pi Pico 1.5 SDK and Espressif's ESP-IDF 5 support in the Moddable SDK. And that is that these are both part of our ongoing effort to keep up to date with each of our microcontroller platforms that we support as those platforms evolve. That keeps new features, fixes, security patches, and optimizations from each of those individual silicon vendors available to you. Let's see, stop sharing there. There you go. And by being regular with these updates, we avoid falling behind and ever having to catch up, doing anything too frantic in terms of, oh no, there's a new IDF to deal with, trying to do that in kind of an incremental, piecewise sort of way. But most importantly, we manage these updates without disruption to our developers. So the Moddable SDK continues to build in the same way. If you have an application, you still use, mcconfig-d-m-p ESP32 if you're building for the ESP32. Nothing has changed there because we've moved to a new IDF version. But most crucially, your scripts will keep running without any changes. And that's a big deal that we want to highlight here. Being able to continue using the same application code in the same way really isn't a guarantee when developing on top of evolving silicon-provided SDKs directly. But it is one of the major advantages of working in JavaScript with the Moddable SDK. You just kind of get that it just keeps working, even though the platform that runs underneath it keeps being improved, keeps getting more secure, keeps getting more performant. Nothing has to change in your application layer. And again, that's a big deal. So before we move on to our next topic, I just want to thank everybody. Oops, I gotta share again. Hang on. There we go. I want to thank everybody that was a community contributor in the month of March for the April release. There were a ton of bug fixes and incremental improvements to modules and improvements to documentation, and really just a lot of issues that came in this month and that were taken care of promptly, most of which would not have happened without reports and contributions from the community. So there's almost too many for me to bother, going through these one at a time here. I would lose everybody on the call, I think. But significant improvements to serial to access bug, web workers, the network modules, the touch driver, wave streamer, XST, BLE, documentation, and then a number of just general purpose issues that came in that they got fixed this month. So thank you to everybody as always, and please keep up the great work. We really appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to switch over to our this month's community ecosystem update. And for that, we have Peter Hoddie joining us to discuss Node-RED MCU Edition. If you haven't heard about this project, it's very interesting. It's a reimplementation of the Node-RED runtime that runs on microcontrollers, bringing the popular low-code environment and its visual editor to inexpensive production-ready devices for the first time. And there's a lot to get into there, but since we have Peter here with us, I'll just hand off to him, and you can tell us more about how this project builds on the XS JavaScript engine and the Moddable SDK to help strengthen both, along with the ECMA 419 standard. Please, Peter, take it away.
Cool, thanks. You can hear me all right?
Yep, you're great.
Awesome. And you can see like a big Moddable logo on your screen, perhaps?
That's correct.
Awesome. I am going to walk you guys through kind of a different perspective on the Node-RED MCU Edition work. It's a very cool project, and I want to talk about why it's so important to the work that we're doing on the core Moddable SDK. So the important things to understand is that Node-RED is this visual programming environment for building IoT projects. It's built on Node.js, so it is JavaScript to the core. But because it uses Node.js, it usually runs on computers or Raspberry Pi. It has tons and tons of uses. Hobbyists use it. Industrial IoT people use it. I heard from one developer who's using it to build the automation systems for a yacht for one of their customers. So it's really, on one hand, it's very friendly and easy to use. And on the other hand, it's really an industrial strength tool. I have been re-implementing Node-RED to run on microcontrollers. It started out as a small, interesting project, and it's evolved. The work, of course, is just building on the Moddable SDK. So you can think of Node-RED as another layer on top. And it uses the ECMA 419 standard extensively. So almost everything you do to talk to hardware or the network is going through this wonderful new standard that we've been building. So, the way I always think of Node-RED MCU is just it's another development environment that builds on top of the Moddable SDK. And it picks up a couple of the key attributes that I've sort of learned about from Node-RED and that have been slowly, I have to say, infiltrating my brain. One is that the Node-RED community, the Node-RED creators, developers, and maintainers are just obsessed with ease of use. It's hard to overstate how much they think about making things easy to use. And they don't think about it in one area, they think about it everywhere. So from getting installed to how you write code, to UI design, to debugging your scripts and flows, the whole thing is unbelievably carefully thought out to try to make it as easy as possible. That doesn't mean it's not powerful. They're not trying to bury functionality. They're just trying to make sure that people are successful early on and continue to be. The other thing is that this stuff is used in mission critical applications. And so the long-term reliability is critical. People are using it for home control, industrial monitoring, and if it fails, it can just be a horrible disaster. One of the developers who's been working a lot with us is using or setting up to use Node-RED Microcontroller Edition to monitor the water level in the tanks in his backyard. And I don't want to be responsible if that fails. And so getting this stuff right is really important. And so that's really fed into how we go about building things and features and debugging and so forth. So I know a lot of the people on this call are familiar with Node-RED, but a lot of people in the Moddable universe are not. And so I wanted to do just the quickest of tours so that people kind of have a sense of what we're talking about, and maybe even will be motivated to try it out themselves. So the back end of Node-RED is really written in Node.js, but the front end just lives in a browser. And so here it is running in Chrome. And I'm just going to build a couple of super quick examples just to give you a feel for what that's like. So the classic place to start when you're getting started with IoT is a Blink application. And so I'm going to grab a digital in node and a digital out node. So when I double click the digital in node, it asks me what's the input pin, say 0. And if I say what the output pin is, it's 2. And on Moddable 2 hardware, that is the LED and the button. And so here I can kind of wire these together. And so now what this says is take the output of the button and send it to the light. And then I can come over here to this very nifty integration panel that Ralph Wetzel created. And I can say, hey, I'm connected up to a Moddable 1. And yep, there we go. Say build. And that will actually, in the background, using the magic of Node, launch a Moddable SDK build. So I'm sure you've all seen one of these before, but here it is running quietly in a browser in the background. And so now that is running on my Moddable 1. You can see it says flows already. And so now if I press the button here, you can't see the light go on and off, but what you can see actually is here, the Node-RED editor shows the status. So it shows the button going from 1 to 0 and the LED going from 1 to 0. And so this kind of visual debugging is really awesome for building stuff because you can see the state of every node, and you don't even add any code. Node-RED just kind of magically does that for you. Now, you can go ahead, and if you wanted to see the output in the developer console, you could say, hey, wire this up to a debug node, and then this will be shown in the debug window as well. And I'll just where do I do that? Oh yeah, here. Just redeploy that. And in a minute, it will, through the magic of downloading firmware, let me do that. There are other places I could send that data. So instead of seeing the LED change or sending it to the console, oh, here it is, we're running. So now you see when I click, you see the payload come through. And so this is me clicking wildly. This is me clicking more slowly. But again, all I had to do was connect some wires up. It's just as easy to send this stuff to the network. So say I want to publish this to MQTT, which is very common in the Node-RED universe. I can just add a wire to MQTT. I can set the server. I always use test.mosquito.org, but use whatever you like. There's a bunch of configuration options. I can set the topic. So I could say this is Moddable button. It's really hard to type and talk, apparently. And then when I run this, I won't run this now. Anybody in the world who is monitoring that MQTT topic would see the button state. All of these I/O use ECMA 419. So this is the ECMA 419 digital input. And in the spirit of ease of use of Node-RED, here we actually link to the ECMA 419 spec. So if you want to know every detail about how digital works, you can get directly to the spec. And you don't have to manually look that up. Other spiffy features, I'll just show you one more node type here because it really kind of starts to show the power of what you can do here. Here's a sensor node. And this is an MCU sensor node that we created, and I'll connect its output to debug just because. And so when I go to the sensor node, what sensor would I like? Well, if you hit the pop-up, it shows you a list of all the different sensors that it knows about. And these are all just kind of built in. And so you can choose whatever sensor you want. Unfortunately, it's off the bottom of the screen, so you're gonna have to trust me that I'm choosing a TI temperature sensor until it appears here. And then there are all the configuration options that you usually have to do in JavaScript. We've built like a wizard. And so you can basically just click your way through to configure it. If you're on the default bus, I2C, you don't have to do anything, but say you hooked it up to some different pins, you can just type in the pin numbers. If for some reason you need to run at a slower speed, you can type in the speed. It knows which I2C addresses are supported, so you can just pick those from a list. If you're not sure about all kinds of options, you can see for temperature sensor in the for this particular component, you can see the sensor class in the ECMA 419 standard and all of the properties. And again, it just links to that. And so you can see we're connecting the standard back into the user interface. And you can also get, if you're curious how it works, you have a link to the source code of the driver. And so this is the manifest, but here's the source. And so you can start to see that very quickly, not only can you build something that works, but you can learn how the pieces fit together and really explore very quickly. And so I've just found this to be a really fantastic environment for kind of building stuff and for people to learn how the Moddable SDK works and how the ECMA 419 standard work. And so this is just some of the kinds of things that we're doing. There's a ton more here. But hopefully you get a sense both of the power, ease of use, and of how to say, oh yeah, and how it connects the pieces together. So back to my slides. Sorry. Just a quick tour. And so what's made this project really interesting for me is that Node-RED developers have really different expectations from embedded JavaScript developers. Some of them are really great JavaScript developers, and some of them really don't use JavaScript much at all and just stay in kind of the higher level interfaces. But their ease of use expectations are very high, and they use the Moddable SDK in very different ways from kind of more traditional embedded JavaScript developers. And because of that, they're driving all kinds of interesting improvements in the Moddable SDK. And those changes don't just benefit the Node-RED users, they benefit everybody. So for example, the XS bug log output that you saw that let me show the console output in the Node-RED window was motivated by a bunch of Node-RED developers who are used to working on headless devices. And they don't want a visual debugger like XS bug. In fact, they can't run a visual debugger like XS bug. They just want the console output. So we created that for those developers. We now support automatic partitioning of Flash on ESP32. And I did that recently because it was just too hard to explain how to manually partition things. And so we wanted to make that something people just didn't have to think about at all. And so that ease of use is really beautiful because one consequence of this is that every single ESP32 developer using the Moddable SDK all of a sudden has between 64 and 300K more free space in Flash than they used to because of the way this feature works. Some nice reliability features. We now detect native stack overflow on Espressif hardware. This catches all sorts of really, really hard to find bugs that happen in obscure situations. But we also did a bunch of work to reduce the amount of stack that we use, so it triggers even less often than it used to. People do wild things like hook up Ethernet and Wi-Fi at the same time, and so those can now coexist. We've done new sensor drivers that people in the Node-RED community have asked for as well. So all kinds of nifty things that have come out of kind of contact with this community. Node-RED developers are also really some of the most extensive users of ECMA 419 right now, especially the network protocol parts that are still being finalized. All of the MQTT, HTTP, WebSocket communication is all being done on ECMA 419 implementations. And so we're really shaking out some of the bugs in the implementation and some of the details as a consequence of working in Node-RED. And so again, I won't read you all of these, but you can see there's some very kind of obscure and interesting errors that were bugs in our code base that we fixed specifically because people coming from the Node-RED universe had the patience to track these problems down because they mattered to their projects, and in some cases helped to actually fix them. And so, so it's really fantastic that we're seeing this whole other group of developers come in. If you haven't tried Node-RED for microcontrollers, I would totally encourage you to do it. I have to say, like a year ago, I had never run Node-RED either. So I understand it seems like a little, especially coming from the embedded space, it seems a little strange, but actually it works remarkably well. You can use as much or as little JavaScript as you want. And if you get something working with Node-RED, you can do the exact same thing in the Moddable SDK, and you can often look at the code in the Node-RED project to see how to do it if you don't know how to do that yourself already. So you know, it's really just kind of great accelerator to get you going. I really do use Node-RED quite a bit. I use it to build demos. I use it to try things. It's just the fastest way to do that. And I should know the Moddable SDK reasonably well by this point. Another thing that's really fantastic that's helped me a lot is that the community around Node-RED is just amazing. It's huge. It's extremely active. If you post a question on their forum, it's usually get an answer very quickly, often from somebody who's very knowledgeable. Because of that kind of focus around ease of use, they really are anxious to help people who are kind of newbies and getting started and trying to figure it out. And so it's a community where coming to it and not being an expert is kind of expected and accepted. And so that's been helpful for me because there's a lot of things about Node-RED I didn't understand, and maybe some still that I really don't. So I would encourage you to give it a try. It may just become like another kind of secret superpower in your tool belt. And it builds directly on your kind of Moddable SDK skills. So if you are thinking about getting started and you happen to be in Japan or speak Japanese, you are extremely lucky because getting started is about to get a lot easier. There is a new book coming out. I won't try to read you anything other than the fact that it might say Node-RED MCU Edition on the front. I was lucky enough to get to look at a preview version of it, and well, I certainly couldn't read every word. I have to say that the breadth of material and the attention to detail in it is really impressive. So I'm sure that there's a tremendous amount to be learned from that by folks who check it out. The authors are Kitazawa-san, Shoji-san, and Toichi-san, all of whom I've had the chance to interact with in recent months and who have made really great contributions both to the Node-RED MCU project and to the Moddable SDK. So I know they know their stuff, and I know they're really serious about helping people get started. The book is published by Fabcross. And you can find that online in the usual places. It will be available for sale at the end of this month. And you can pre-order on Amazon if you can get them to ship to you outside of Japan. I'm going to find a way to get a copy. I'm told that might happen. The coolest thing maybe is the promotional tour that's going with the book. There are 4 events coming up, a couple of them online. So if you're motivated, no matter where you are in the world, I guess you can tune in. The one that I'm most jealous of is Maker Faire Kyoto, because I had thought Maker Faire was done and finished and gone everywhere in the world. But apparently in Japan, they've managed to preserve Maker Faire. And so it's really exciting that these guys are going to get to be able to go and talk about this project there, and introduce a whole new group of developers and users to the wonders and joy of embedded JavaScript. So there's that, and I think yes, I can see Kitazaki-san and Shoji-san are on the call. I don't know, Kitazaki-san, do you want to say anything briefly just about your plans or the book? I'll stop sharing
Peter-san,
the screen.
thanks. Thank you for Peter-san. Let me introduce myself briefly. I'm from Node-RED and IoT community in Japan. I met Node-RED MCU Edition at Node-RED conference last October. I'm really excited to know Node-RED Flow works on a microcomputer. I'm glad to contribute for Moddable community and commit some devices of MFI stacks. Shoji-san, today here in this community, and Tao-san, not here today, but and me, are going to publish a paper book on 27th next week. It covers introduction, all of the platform, macOS, Windows, Linux, and Raspberry Pi installation, some of sample files and application connected to the cloud. Microcontroller, not front end, back end, and cloud, all of things are programmable by JavaScript. Sorry for book in Japanese, but maybe helpful for people who don't know Moddable and Node-RED and microcontrollers. Shoji-san, some more comments from you?
Yes. Hello, everybody. I am one of the author of the book. I was called by Kitazaki-san and joined to this book team. I wrote mainly latter part of the book, creating this kind of breadboard and ESP32 and some sensors and buttons, and step by step explaining electronics manufacturing, product manufacturing. So maybe it is very good help for Japanese people, but unfortunately, it is only in Japanese. So maybe there are another book in the English will published that will be very nice, that I think. And as Peter-san said, promotion event, we will have some promotional event in Japan. And especially, I will exhibit on Maker Faire Kyoto in next week, and at the not next week, at the end of this April, and now making some product to support cultivating moss. Plants of moss using Node-RED MCU and Node-RED SDK power. And I'm very looking forward to having a chance to exhibit in the Maker Faire Kyoto this time. But I hope it will help spread Moddable SDK and Node-RED MCU Edition. Thank you very much.
I think that's all for our introduction. Peter-san, thank you.
Awesome.
For time.
Thank you both. Yeah, no, thank you both for joining us. It's I mean, your contributions have been really meaningful and helpful, and I wish you guys a lot of success on your book launch. And with that, I will flip it back to Andy. I think we can wrap up from there, maybe.
Fantastic. Thank you, all three of you. That's amazing work to see coming together and to see, the very tangible things that are being built on top of the ECMA 419 standard at this point. It's fantastic to see. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for the YouTube version of the call. Everybody that's with us on the call, please feel free to stick around, and we'll do a little Q&A and discussion after this. But first, for those who couldn't make it today, we're sorry we missed you. I hope you're watching this here on YouTube. Please drop by our Gitter anytime to chat, start a new discussion on our GitHub repository, or contact us on Twitter at Moddable Tech. And we'll see you next month after the May release. Thank you for joining us.